trustees, especially at medium to larger libraries. I've been a library director in Vermont for 10 years and in the library world since I graduated from college. So going on 25 now. And let me turn it over to Joy to say hello.
Morning, everybody. My name is Joy Warland, and I'm the consultant for continuing education and small and rural libraries. So that coincides with Kevin's work because continuing education includes continuing education for trustees like this event. And also, of course, small and rural libraries have trustees, thankfully. So we work together a lot closely. And as Kevin said, we're always available for questions. So if you're not sure whether to ask Kevin or me, just ask one of us and we'll get in touch with the other if we want to pool our resources or if it seems like the question's for another person. So welcome to this event this morning.
All right, why don't we get going? I see some familiar faces out there, or names, I should say. So good to see you all here. Thanks for attending. You're a library trustee now. So perhaps you've been a trustee for a while and this is a refresher, or this is your first year and you were elected or appointed. Thank you for offering that service to your community. We're going to start with really the basics, and that is how a public library is defined in Vermont. So our General Assembly actually has it in statute that a public library has been declared to be essential to the general enlightenment of citizens in a democracy, and every citizen of the state of Vermont should have access to a free public library. And I just want to point out a couple of words that are in this. One is the word free. It appears twice, actually. They really are emphasizing that a public library should offer its basic services for free. And then the other word that I think is important here is every citizen. Not every community in Vermont has a public library, but our General Assembly really wants us to provide services to every citizen in Vermont, which means oftentimes we provide services to people that aren't in our tax base, for example. So that is in statute. So we'll move on. What is a public library? How is that defined? And this again is in statute. Title 22 is really the library statute for Vermont for the most part. So a public library is a library that's either a private association or corporation. We have many incorporated libraries in Vermont that provides, again, that word free, basic library services free of charge to residents. And then I'd also like to point out the last part of this definition, and that is that a public library should receive some of its annual financial support from public funds. So that means, if you're a municipal library, the great majority of it is likely coming from public funds. But if you're an incorporated library, you probably go to your select board and ask for some or a lot of your financing. So that's the public part of things, is that public financing. And that actually comes out of when we shifted over from private libraries in the 1800s to public libraries. One of the things that Carnegie required was public support for any library he was contributing money to building for at least 10 years, because he wanted these institutions to be ongoing and free. That's the definition of a public library. And I've talked a little bit already about incorporated versus municipal libraries, but this is something that you're going to see throughout this presentation that impacts the way that you are serving as a trustee. So moral, yes, the meeting is being recorded. So you will have access to this, and all the slides, we will send them your way along with the links. So don't feel obligated to write down every link or everything. We're going to send this presentation your way. Types of public libraries. Generally speaking, you are likely either an incorporated, a municipal, or a community library. About 30% of our libraries are incorporated. About 70% of our libraries are municipal. And for those 12 community libraries that are out there, they're also generally municipal in our state, but a community library is a joint library, usually between a public library and a school library. I recently queried a group of librarians in Vermont about the advantages and disadvantages of being incorporated versus municipal, and I want to read you some of what they said, which I thought was interesting. So the librarians who worked in incorporated libraries said that they had a certain buffer from political winds to a degree. They had a greater ability to fundraise outside of the municipal structure, and funding from multiple towns was also easier because you didn't have to work out between select boards who was going to pay what. Um, they don't have to worry as much, and we'll talk about this later, about open meeting law, public records requests, and they also can set their own rules outside of the municipality. For example, if you have rules related to patron conduct, no trespass, things like that, it's a little easier if you're a nonprofit. Um, the director can help steward board membership, so getting a good mix more, whereas if board members are appointed by a select board or elected, um, you really have to be much more hands off for that process. And um, finally, if a municipality is at odds with itself, if there are departments that don't agree, or say, public safety and the library are doing two different things, which I've seen before, um, the library can kind of be caught in the middle of that. And so those all sound like great things for incorporated libraries, but we also had some advantages for municipal libraries. So the big advantage typically is that HR related questions, benefits, maintenance, any municipal services that are provided in the town don't have to be contracted out by the library to accomplish those services. And that's a big matter of efficiency. The board and the library director can really focus on running the library and not, getting the driveway plowed or fixing a leak or dealing with a difficult HR question. Let's see. The Oftentimes for a municipal library, you have built-in relationships with other departments. So when I was in Middlebury, I would meet with every 2 weeks all the other department heads, and I would know what was going on with Parks and Rec and know what was going on with the town clerk and whatnot. So that was a great way to build those relationships and work on programs together. You typically don't have to fundraise as much because that money from the municipal allocation is baked in. And when the town budget passes, for most, but not all libraries, the library budget also passes. Now, there have been some that are put out as separate articles now, but typically that's the case. So that was just an interesting conversation I had recently to pass along. I joked that we should have a volleyball game at the VLA conference between incorporated and municipal libraries to duke it out. So we're going to talk a little bit about trustees and incorporated libraries. Uh, there, there are separate sections in Title 22 that relate to incorporated libraries and municipal libraries. So neither Joy nor I are lawyers. We should make that clear. So we're not going to be able to interpret statute for you, which is why we're really putting the statute up on the slide here. But I will tell you, if you are going in to look at library statute, make sure that your type of library, first of all, know what type of library you are, and that someone on the trustees should know. But make sure that you're looking at the statute that relates to your type of library. So incorporated libraries, for example, have membership somewhere between 5 or 15 uh, in terms of the board of trustees, and the trustees are completely in charge within statute of how their library will run. So, uh, and let me jump forward here. Municipal libraries, on the other hand, you'll see have a very specific set of functions that they perform because, of course, a municipality ultimately also has a select board and typically, a lot of times, a town manager. So in statute right now, municipal libraries have full power to manage the public library, make bylaws, elect officers, establish a library policy, and receive, control, and manage property. So those are what is specified in statute for a municipal library board. There are some things there you may notice that are missing, and one of those would be, for example, set the library budget. That is now, there is language, and again, not a lawyer, there is language about managing property that comes into the hands of the municipality, but oftentimes or sometimes the library board and the select board want to fund the library differently. And that's something that we found, at least in most cases, the select board currently really has the power to set that library budget. That could be changing, we don't know, but that is typically the case. It's usually a negotiation there. I also want to point out, I don't know if we have anybody here from a town that has a municipal charter, but one of the things we've learned fairly recently from the League of Cities and Towns is if you have a municipal charter, your municipal charter actually overrides this portion of the library law. Municipal charters are passed through not only the town where they are, but also on a state level, and they're part of state law. And the League of Cities and Towns has indicated, and I can share this link with you, that municipal charters override specific state law because they're even more specific and they are passed by the state as a whole. And so how this can impact your library, as an example, many charters specify that the town manager supervises all department heads, and some particularly call out the library director. And so rather than the library board supervising the library director or the librarian, that may be something the town manager does. For example, in Essex Junction, I know Chittenden County Libraries because that's where I worked. In Colchester, in many towns, that's part of their charter. So as a trustee, I would suggest taking a look, if you're a municipal trustee, at your town's charter, if you have one. Not every town has a charter, just to see if there's any language in there, or ask someone else on the board if they're aware of that. All right, so that was a lot of statute. We're going to look now at some general principles of what a trustee should be doing ideally. So the big picture, the shared goal of trustees, uh, directors, staff, the Friends group, really everyone who's involved, the library volunteers, is to make your library the best that it can be. So the prosperity of the library. And I think that the best is not necessarily the biggest, the most well-funded. It's not, the newest library. It's the library that best suits your community and their needs. So we have a laws of library science that Joy and I learned when we were getting our master's degree. That one of the laws is for every reader, their book. And that means if you have a book in your library, it ought to be there for someone to read. Otherwise, you should think of deselecting it. And I think the same is true for libraries. For every community, there's a specific type of library that's ideal for their community. And I think the role of a trustee really is to translate what that is into how the library functions. Joy, did you want to jump in on that?
No, if you saw my mic on, it was just because I was messing with the power being out and trying to use my phone as a hotspot. But I'm
Oh,
back.
okay.
I'm going to weigh in a couple slides. I have a couple things to add, but not right now. Thanks for
Okay.
checking, though.
I didn't want to leave you out. Okay, very good. We're about halfway through halfway, so we'll have questions and not too far from now. So prosperity of the library, that's the big picture. And then these are what we consider the primary duties of trustees, whether you are municipal or incorporated. The duty of care, which means to perform your role as a trustee in good faith and in a manner that you believe is in the best interest of the organization. Um, Loyalty, that means you need to put aside any personal conflicts, put the library first. Conflict of interest, many towns have conflict of interest and ethics policies. In fact, most towns were required to pass those. So if you're a municipal library trustee, that likely applies to you. But it's also, any library, you want to avoid those conflicts of interest. I worked at a library a number of years back where the board chair was also an author, and he sold his books to the library and wrote the checks to himself. He wasn't doing this out of malice, but he did get in some trouble for it because he should not have been signing checks to himself. That's the end result there. So avoid the conflict of interest or perceived conflict of interest. And finally, obedience. So one of the reasons you're here and listening to this presentation is that you want to be able to run your library in accordance with statutes, with your library bylaws, your policies, and if you're changing policies, you want to do those in an above board fashion that really follows those rules that are in place. So that's a 5,000-foot overview of how trustees are responsible for the oversight of their library. All right, now we're getting into really fine print, and I apologize if this is tiny on your screen. I put my reading glasses on so I could read it. But this is really getting into the nitty-gritty of what you need to know. And I would take a look at this slide and kind of look at it as a checklist for if you don't have this information, ask your library director, ask your board chair, ask us. But is your library municipal, incorporated, community? Uh, who are all the people involved in your library? Most libraries have a staff directory, library directory, I should say, that includes staff, board members, key volunteers, maybe those folks who actually come in and help staff the library if you have that. Um, Sometimes emergency contacts are on there, friends of the library. Oftentimes, those people you need to call if there's a building related issue like plumbing or HVAC or something like that. So have that key information. Also, your library bylaws, which really govern how you run the organization, your policies, the staff roles and their job descriptions, basic information like hours, the library phone number, the website, because people will ask you that when you're out at a baseball game or in the grocery store. I had a colleague who got stopped in the grocery store once and asked where someone could find the soy sauce because they recognized her from the library. And so they knew she knew how to find things. But you will get asked those things once people find out you're a library trustee. And the same thing with the basics of what the library offers. So that sort of 30-second elevator speech about, why you became a trustee and what it means for you. The mission, hopefully you have a mission. If not, that's something we have some info we can help with, and your strategic plan or your long range plan, also your town's plan. And I would take a look at that overall, but also see where the library fits in that. Hopefully there's some info about that. Every year, most libraries are required to submit an annual report to the town. So take a look at a couple of years of those. It helps you, get a sense of what the library has been doing, what they've been up to, a lot of statistics, and also libraries have to submit annual statistics to us so we can send them on to the federal government. And so those are good to get a sense of kind of benchmarking where you're at. And finally, the public library standards. The last time our library standards were updated was 38 years ago, and that's okay. But we do have there's a bevy of standards that are out there for public libraries. These are standards, but they're also within the standards. It says voluntary, so they're not standards that every library has to meet. But I will tell you, if any of you applied, for example, for the first round of these capital grants that were out there. There's a bunch of information about how many hours is your library open, how many weeknight and evening hours is your library open. Those basic qualifying questions that would score your little higher points, those were taken from the minimum standards. So we do still refer to those in the department when we're doing things like qualifying for grants. So it's something that's worth taking a look at. I'm not going to go over all of them just for time, but I did want to let you know that they are in existence. So
Kevin, I want to add one thing here, just about what the library offers. I think it's important to remember for trustees that you don't have to use all of the services that the library offers. You might not have small children, for example, and of course there's an active story time at your program, at your library, or your library might have a robust library of things and you have no need for the things that are in the library of things. But it's really important that you know what they are and are able to talk about them, even if they are things that don't really apply to you as a patron, but it could apply to somebody else that you're talking to, either at the library or, as Kevin said, on the ski lift, in the grocery store, in the post office. That happens a lot. So just be very aware of everything, the wide range of things your library offers. Again, just even if you don't use them. And the same thing with the library mission. I just want to emphasize how important it is that you're in tune with that you're aware of it, and you're able to speak about it in a convincing way, even if it might be something that you personally might not agree with. As a trustee, you're there for the organization and there to present a united front of the policies and the mission. So be very aware of that and be comfortable speaking about it as well, because you will get asked about that. And you'll have great opportunities to promote the library that might just come up casually, where you can use some of that language and do sort of informal advocacy for your library with that language.
Excellent points. Thank you. And I should point out that Joy basically developed this entire presentation. I borrowed it. So I appreciate you adding to it, but this is really her presentation. So credit where credit is due. Um, I actually covered a lot of these broad considerations earlier, so I'm not going to go over every single one of them. But I do want to say I'm going to go over some of the ones that I didn't cover, and those are things like attending library events. This is something when I was a director, I love to see my trustees coming in to see an author talk or a musical event. It made a difference in their knowledge of what we were doing in the library, but also their ability to kind of be present and learn about what folks were, getting out of programs. So, take a look at what the schedule is at your library and try to find a program that works. If there's nothing there, maybe um, bring it up at the board meeting as something, could we think about a program in this area that I would love to attend? Um, let's see, current issues. We put out a twice weekly newsletter that I can help you sign up for if you need to. But we also put out or a twice weekly update digest that you can sign up for. But we also put out a monthly newsletter, and I highly recommend those, as well as attending conferences. We'll talk about a couple of those in a little while. And finally, that relationship with the friends of the library is very important. This is done in different ways. There's no one way to do it, but I would say having at least some time during the year when you invite, if you have a friends group, a person in, sometimes every meeting the Friends president attends the board of trustees, sometimes once a year, and then vice versa, having someone from the trustees attend the Friends meeting, maybe not every time, but at least every so often, and then potentially even having a memorandum of understanding or some document that really talks about how you work together. And Joy, you had something to add?
Um, I just want to put in to mention that the avoid involvement with regular operations of the library, and this comes up regularly in small libraries where there just aren't enough people to run the library, and sometimes the trustees not only volunteer as trustees, but get involved with, like, they might work the desk, and that can get very complicated. So if there's any way to avoid that, keep your trustee role as a trustee and don't volunteer in other ways. Of course, be a patron of the library, but it gets tricky because as trustees, you're supervising the library director, who is actually the library director is supervising the volunteers usually. So if you are playing dual roles there, it gets very complicated, and will just be easier if you can help them find other people to do those things when it comes to running the library.
Thanks. That's a really good point. And I think we have a couple slides on kind of what the bread and butter is for the board and then the library director. And at the end, there's a great link to um, the board responsibilities, the director responsibilities, and the friends responsibilities typically. And you'll see that link. That's a really great document to look at as well. So what do you get to do? Well, lots of stuff. Your bylaws, reviewing and updating those, so how you function as a board, it's important to have those in place and to review them. Your policies. So a difference between a bylaw and a policy is a bylaw is the same as sort of a rule. So again, if you're a um, incorporated library, bylaws are just something that um, are how you run your organization. But if you're a municipal library, bylaws really are a higher standard that have to go through review publicly, and that opportunity for two public meetings, a warning, a 45-day review period, and they are essentially the same as sort of an ordinance. So a bylaw is kind of a higher level of scrutiny available to the public, whereas a policy is something that you can create, review, update, and you should. We'll have a slide later on with what those are, what the main ones are. But setting those policies, reviewing those policies, planning, so your strategic plan, your long range plan, where you're going, with the library, the services, the collections, the building. Hiring and supervising the library director. So you may be a small, two-person library, or you may have levels of staff, but whoever that primary person is in charge of the library, that's a really important thing because they're probably going to be there a while, and they're going to really set the tone for your library and the services that it provides. Establishing the budget, requesting funds. Those aren't always, as I mentioned, approved. That's sometimes a negotiation, but figuring out how much money you're going to need. And then also stewarding the library. So the maintenance, facilities, inspections, grounds, working with your director to make sure that those items, and if you see any capital expenses that are coming up, planning for those. Obviously, meeting on a regular basis. I think 4 times a year is the minimum for public libraries boards, and then championing the library. So advocating for people to use the library, people who maybe don't need the library to support it, either financially or just through votes. So talking with folks who maybe don't come into the library, but they really are library supporters. And finally, this is a small point, but making sure that you stay in compliance when it comes to grant funding. We found a few libraries that either on their own or with their municipality are not able to apply for grants because there was some paperwork that wasn't filed. So, you ultimately have that fiduciary responsibility. Um, Joy, did you want to
And I
jump in
just,
or should
yeah,
I?
I just want to emphasize that point because, yeah, there's nothing worse at our department when we realize the library can't apply for a grant because a piece of paperwork wasn't turned in. And sometimes that's going to be, you have to know what the paperwork is that you need to turn in. And you also, if you're a municipal library, have to work closely with the municipal financial people because sometimes it's a piece of paper that they haven't turned in and they might not have known they were supposed to. They might not have kept up with what grants the library was getting. So just make sure you know what those are and you know who the people you are that you have to connect with it in order to make sure all of that is turned in a timely way.
And if you're having any trouble with some of that, let us know way ahead of time because we can give you some pointers. But if it's the night before the grants due, we probably can't help because sometimes this is the federal or state government. I guess we're state government, but the more challenging bureaucracies. So, way ahead of time, figure that out. Thank you, Joy. Uh, so library director responsibilities. So you've hired and you're supervising the director, but really the director is the one who's implementing those policies that you've worked on together, and they're in charge of the daily operation of the library. So your director is hiring and supervising any staff. They're working on collection development and programming with your advice, with your policies, but really giving them that freedom to work on that is important for a good working relationship. They should be reporting to you on a regular basis what's going on, and they should also work to submit that written annual report to the town, as well as the annual statistical report that goes to the state. That's something that both you and the board chair and the library director should sign off on, but the library director really collects that information. Um, and then finally, library policies, which I mentioned the board sets. You certainly can lean a little on your director to help you create those policies. We also have model policies that we have collected and curated from libraries around the state, and there'll be a link for that at the end of the presentation. But these are the policies that Joy and I feel are, I think, the most important for a library to consider having. So there are many other policies you may have, but having a policy that talks about how long your books check out for, what you do if something goes missing or if you charge fines, um, having a policy about what you buy and why you buy it, and if someone is requesting that you reconsider something that you have on the shelf, how you deal with those requests, a policy about your meeting room. And we actually put bulletin board under facilities, which seems a little weird, but they actually tend to be very close to each other in terms of intellectual freedom related issues. And again, challenges. If someone doesn't like sort of who's meeting or what is going up on your bulletin board or your exhibits. So that's why those are grouped together. Internet use policy. This was something that was very important when some of the legislation around the Patriot Act came about, but it's still important, especially if you have a lot of folks coming in who want to use a small number of computers. So that can be the nitty-gritty there. Intellectual freedom, that relates again to the collection development policy. Um, the use of the library, that's kind of bread and butter, the behavior that is expected of folks when they come in the library. And the key there, I think, is making sure that you use a lens of equity when it comes to those policies. So you don't want to write any policy that's specific to one group. You want to make sure that the policy is written to apply to everyone, and that when it's enforced, that it is applied to everyone equally. We've seen court cases in other places, not as much in Vermont, when policies were written either to target a specific group or were enforced um, selectively. So keep that in mind. A policy around your programs that you offer, a policy around kids that are in the library that are too young to be there by themselves or that are still there when your library is closing. That is something that perennially comes up. And if you do have social media, some policy around how you utilize social media. These are all kind of bread and butter. We have examples of all of these, and there will be a link later on. Let's jump
Can
one
I
more
just add a
forward.
couple
Oh, of
things?
course, of
Um,
course.
just uh, just elaborate a little bit more about the equity and the library use thing. I think a lot of times that is enforced in a not equitable way unintentionally. So it could be something like the amount of noise somebody's making, and you think it's charming when kids are making a lot of noise because they're cute and they're having fun in the library. But when they become teenagers, suddenly that's not as cute anymore. Or somebody else who's an adult and for whatever reason is making noise that is, making other, that you think might be too much. Or sleeping in the library is sometimes one of the things that comes up. So just think about it. It's kind of more nuanced than it might seem like it is. If a behavior is okay for one member of your community, it has to be okay for another. So just think about it that way. And then I also just want to do my small rural consultant thing, where sometimes we see that there are a lot of awesome small libraries that operate really well, but in a sort of a casual way. Even if you're a small library, if you're a tiny library, you still need policies written down, because lots of times you don't need it until it's not working well, and things have been going along for a long time, and maybe something changes, maybe staff changes, maybe the community environment changes, and so maybe things are not working as well. If you don't have things in writing, and you're kind of relying on we've always done it this way and it's worked in the past, um, that's not really going to work if any challenges come up. So just encouraging small libraries to not sort of be complacent and get into that. Well, we can figure this out as we go. You probably can, but just put it down in writing the way that you're figuring it out on your own.
Thank you. That's a really important point. And I love when Joy comes in to talk about some of what happens at the smaller libraries, because typically it's applicable everywhere, but we have so many smaller libraries. I think we have more libraries per capita than any other state, but we don't have any more funding, which means each of those libraries is a little smaller and a little more uh, bootstrappy, maybe is the right word for it. So I appreciate that perspective. And I'm not going to talk about these links, but I will say they're going to be in the PowerPoint when we send it to you. We have that link to our curated policies. The ALA guidelines are kind of generally what you should look at when you're writing a policy. And I would recommend taking a look at that. It has a list of about a dozen, things to think about when you're writing any policy. And then the equity, diversity, inclusion related to the Library Bill of Rights. So I'm going to pause there and give folks a chance to either write a question in the chat or to raise your hand. We're just going to spend about 5 minutes before we move forward again. But give folks, if you have a question that's really you're thinking about, feel free to jump in and ask it, or we can also keep going because we a lot of information. All right. Well, we'll keep going because we'll try to we make it through the entire presentation, which would be great. Joy and I haven't done that for a couple of classes now. All right. Oh, thanks, Deb. All right. So sample policies. I'm going to jump forward to board meetings. So all of you likely meet, and as I mentioned before, 4 times per year is kind of the minimum. You should be following. Oh, Lauren, you have a question. Feel free to type it in or unmute and fire away. I'm going to go ahead and keep going while you are getting that question ready. Oh, you feel free to type it in if you want, Lauren, and I'll keep going and then I'll stop once you get it. Oh, okay. There's a question about policies by library tip. Yes. So that's a very good question. We do have our policy. We make sure to have a policy we try to have one for an incorporated library and a municipal library in our sample policies. And then we do try to have examples from smaller libraries and larger libraries if we found ones that we feel are good examples. So yes, we do try to provide different levels of policy. Also, if you're looking at our strategic plans, we have some samples of those, and we also try to curate those for both smaller and larger libraries and incorporated and municipal. So yes. Let's see.
So there's the one from Moral Memorial about is the library small and doesn't need a long range plan. You may not need, I mean, I think sometimes people think strategic plan and they think it's this very long process and they have to have community meetings and then they have to do many, many different things, focus groups and then come up with a very long document that they may or may not use. You don't necessarily have to do all that. You should get as much information as you can from your community about what they want from the library, and you should have some plans related to that. If you don't necessarily need to call it a long range plan, but it fits into your mission as well. Why are you doing what you're doing, and how are you deciding which things you do if you don't have some degree of a plan? So I think don't get stuck on the language strategic plan or long range plan, but there do need to be goals and you need to be strategic, not necessarily in a strategic plan, but you need to be strategic and thoughtful, intentional, I guess is a good word, about why you're doing the things. Why do you have a certain type of programming at your library? Well, hopefully it's because people in your community have requested that, or they have shown in some way by attending or by the other things they're interested in the community that they want those things. So you do need to have an intentional plan around what you're doing, but it doesn't have to be a formal plan.
Great question. And Lauren, I see your question about creating policies, and that's actually that fits in very well with the slide we have right now about board meetings. So yes, essentially a library can create and modify a policy through a vote of the board at the board meeting. Board meetings typically are open to the public. Typically, there's an agenda posted ahead of time. If were working on a policy, that would be kind of the minimum, I would say, is to have it on the agenda, to talk about it at the board meeting, and to approve it. Now, that would be the minimum. I would say the best practice for creating a policy would be a little more extended, and that would be you would want to work with the director to look at model policies and sort of base your policies to a certain degree off of those, although your library is unique, but that's a good place to start. Typically, most boards have the director work with either the board chair or with a person on the board, but not a quorum, because the board can't meet as a quorum outside of a warned meeting for municipal libraries, to work on a draft policy that is presented to the board for consideration. And a lot of times, the board will either accept it with changes, accept it right away, or say, this really isn't what we were looking for. Can we go back to the drawing board? But yeah, basically a vote of the board is how a policy is put into place. So you have bylaws, which require a warned meeting if you're municipal. You have policies, which require a vote of the board. And then you have procedures, which are something that the director can work on to implement a policy. Those are sort of those three levels. I think there's a couple more questions. Let me see if I can jump in there. Ian, you had a question about, oh, okay, virtual, okay, swearing in. Do you need to be sworn in if you're elected to conduct library business? I'm not with the Secretary of State's office. Highly recommend them for any elected questions. But I would say I believe the answer is probably yes, if that's part of the process of how your municipality operates. So I would participate as a trustee to be and not a voting member at that point. Uh, Interesting question though with the storm. Um, all right. So let's keep going. Best practices for board meetings. Thank you for those questions. So I mentioned sharing agenda and documents ahead of time. As a board, it's best to be as publicly facing as possible so that folks in your community can be a part of the conversation about how the library is run. That is required for municipal libraries, but it's a best practice also for incorporated libraries. It'll help you know what the community wants to do, and it helps with the fundraising that oftentimes incorporated libraries have to work on. Um, Providing opportunities for the public to participate. Library staff, the best example of library staff I've seen is I think Williston brings in one staff member every meeting or every other meeting to come and talk about what they've done for the year. And I think that's a great way for them to feel like they're included in the planning process, and also for the board to hear about what it is that they're doing and to meet new staff that have come on board. But certainly, you want your director to have the ability to provide a report about what they've been doing, and then sharing those minutes um, after each meeting. I'm not supposed to talk about legislation that's in the works, but there is some hybrid meeting legislation that is currently being discussed that could change a little bit about this in the future. And any legislation that's happening right now, we're going to put out information once if it becomes law. But I just wanted to mention that there is some, I think it was S55, and I'm not sure where it is in the House now. But there could be some updates about how meetings need to be run by municipal libraries. So let's
Kevin,
jump ahead.
there's another
Yeah.
question in the chat that I
Oh,
wanted to get to, so we don't forget about it. Dottie asked about the requiring two people to be present in the library, and that sometimes that requires a board member to be that second person. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for having that policy that it has to be more than one person there. It's a real challenge in rural libraries, and there's situations where it's not always safe for there to just be one person, and there just isn't a workaround for it. I would say try to avoid that, but I think this is just my opinion. Obviously not, but that it's better to have two people there than one person. And in that case, that overrides that you would prefer that the board member did not volunteer in that way. And then, one thing that you could try to do as a board member, try to find other volunteers, help the library director find some volunteers. It could even be, in some instances, a high school student needs to fulfill a community service kind of thing. Maybe that could be somebody. So yeah, just try to avoid it. But in terms of best practices, I think the best practice of having two people there is a more important best practice than not having trustees volunteer.
I don't know if anybody's here from this library. I'm not going to name the library, but there was a library that said their plan, since they were by themselves, was to open their window and yell to the gas station across the street if there was any emergency. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want that to be my plan for an emergency. So 100% agree. Um, so board meetings and records. Municipal libraries are required to follow both open meeting law, and this is something that the Secretary of State promulgates, and then public records law. So things like Freedom of Information Act type requests. So keep that in mind if you're a municipal public library. Any email that you send could be FOIA'd. Any meeting that you have of a quorum of your board needs to happen with a warning. You can warn and have a meeting right away if it's an emergency meeting, but you do need to follow those very specific guidelines for elected officials. I had a question about trustees commuting together in a car recently, and if there was a quorum of them coming together in a car, how would that work? And I said they're fine to ride together in a car as long as they don't talk about the library. So maybe put on some good music or something on the way. But it is important to follow that, and libraries do get called on that. Library boards do. If you are an incorporated library, you are not required to follow those. However, it is considered a best practice to follow those guidelines for terms of being open with how you run things. And incorporated libraries do take a lot of public money as well. So that public money doesn't come with the requirement to follow that open meeting law, but you will oftentimes get questioned if most of your funding comes from a town allocation. Why aren't you, open in terms of how you're governed? So consider that when you consider um, how you're running your board meetings. Leave it at that. Tax exempt status. This is important that you file every couple of years, I think, with the Secretary of State. We'll have a link. I'm not going to go into the statute here, but we'll have a link later on for how you can look up your corporation, make sure you filed. Also, 501c3 or incorporated libraries do typically have to file some kind of a tax filing as well. You don't have to pay taxes, but you do have to file something like a 990 since you're a 501c3. So keep that in mind. Confidentiality of patron records. This applies to every library, municipal or incorporated. So patrons who are using the library have an expectation of confidentiality, except in very specific circumstances. I'm not going to go into all of the details about that, but I will say right now, if you are 16 years or older, nobody should have access to your library records unless it's for official business. And that official business is itemized here. One of the examples would be if there was a warrant or a judicial order. I had an officer at a library where I worked come in with a library card they found in a trash bag that had been dumped in the woods near where we lived or near where the library was. And they wanted to know who dumped the trash bag. And the only identifying thing they had was this library card. And I said, truthfully, I want to tell you who it is, but I'll need you to go get a warrant before I do that so that this evidence doesn't get thrown out in court because this is the law. And they did, and it all worked out. But this is also something, there's a bill right now in the legislature, S220, that is may change the age down to 12 from 16. And we don't know where that's going to end up. But again, if it does get passed and that changes, we are going to put out information on it. So just keep in mind, these are laws that are regularly changing. But basically, the idea is any sort of circulation, any sort of a person coming in the building, you're really not supposed to say, even if you saw so-and-so in the building publicly. So keep that in mind. And this applies not just to the library employees, but also to the library officers and volunteers. So, if you're running the circulation desk on that day when you had to come in and help out, you don't want to say what somebody was checking out. We don't even, as a rule, have conversations about what someone's checking out, just to try to err on the side of caution. Joy, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I just want to add that the way this comes up most of the time is probably not going to be, a warrant. It's going to be somebody coming in saying, "Can I pick up my partner's book that's on hold?" Well, no, they can't unless you have it in writing. So as long as you know this ahead of time, you can preemptively get, see, like the number one thing is with the written permission of the library patron to whom the records pertain. So it's not to make it inconvenient for your patrons. It's to make it safe for them because they might not want their partner to know what they're reading. Or, again, a person who's a youth who's over 16 has the right for their parents not to necessarily know what they're checking out. And the other way that this comes up, you have to be careful about your language too. You're sitting working at the desk, or the thing with the hold, don't call up and say the book that you got, and then say the name of the book and leave it on a voicemail that the book has arrived. So just it takes some kind of thinking about it in advance. But again, it's for safety, it's for confidentiality, it's to protect patrons who, for whatever reason, want that privacy, but there are ways to make it work for convenience as well. So I think my overall point is don't blow it off because it's a couple extra steps for you.
We used to note in the patron's record, like we have given permission from so and so to go pick up the books, and if they didn't have it, we would actually have them call on the cell phone, and try to get permission over the phone sometimes. So absolutely important. Let's move on. We're going to go over some resources. These are intellectual freedom related resources. You hear a lot in the news now about things like book challenges, book bans, program challenges. And so there are some, or the ALA really has kind of taken the lead on that. We do have a Vermont Library Association as well that has an intellectual freedom group. So if you need some resources around how libraries work to promote intellectual freedom, the resources are here. Um, and I want to talk about some of the supports that you have. I think this is important. And I honestly didn't know until I started working for the Department of Libraries about a year ago how much there was in the department available to help you out. So we have a trustee section. I knew about that. It has a manual. It has a bunch of other great information. But we also have consultants that are here to help you run the library in the most effective manner you can for you and your director. So we have a consultant from the ABLE library for the blind and visually impaired. We have a consultant for small and rural libraries, which is Joy, who's right here. I'm a consultant for library governance. We have a youth services consultant, a technology consultant. I'm probably leaving one of our consultants off here. Interlibrary loan, government documents, reference assistance. So we have people who are specifically charged under statute. Oh, cataloging. Yes, thank you. To provide advice and consultation for the running of public libraries. And so that's what we do. And part of it are presentations like this, and part of it are questions you have that you can't find an answer to within the what you have at your library or within what we have online. So we're always happy and we have our contact information, but if you follow any of the links that are here, you'll get that. We offer the training, lots of continuing education. Joy coordinates a certificate of librarianship program that is typically a multi-year program where folks can get a credential that allows them to run a library in Vermont. It's a wonderful program. We have a Friends and Trustees listserv. I don't know how many of you are on that, but you can link to and sign up for that with the link that's here. There's been a great discussion about grant policies recently on that. And then Niche Academy, that's again something that Joy manages, and that's where we put a lot of presentations and other information, both stuff that we've created, like this presentation, and also library-related continuing education that's produced in-house or produced by other folks that we feel are helpful. Um, so that's an overview. Joy, did you want to jump in there at all?
Just to say that Niche Academy is very easy to use. It's an online platform and there's content from a lot of great providers nationally, as well as Kevin said, all of our recordings of our things. It's divided into different academies, and I think it's pretty intuitive to use. But if you ever have questions about that, you can contact me, and I will walk you through it.
Thank
And
you.
it's
And
free.
you do, the first time you use it, you have to sign up, but it's free. Yeah. Um, some more helpers. So the Vermont Library Association, they have a wonderful conference every year. It's coming up on the 20th in Southern Vermont, well, Killington, so sort of Southern Central Vermont. Joy and I are both going to be presenting. I'll be doing a Policies 101 program there. Um, Yes, Linda, you do access Niche Academy from the department's website. Absolutely. And there's a link in there that'll take you from the presentation as well. Um, consider maybe sending a trustee along with your director if you're going to go to the VLA conference. Um, that's a great resource. The League of Cities and Towns has some good information. If you're a municipal library, chances are your municipality uh, is enrolled in some program with the League of Cities and Towns. Some libraries are insured that way, but great information. Also, the Association of Rural and Small Libraries, they're a national organization. We have some members who are in leadership for ARSL here, both librarians. I think Joy is a member of a committee for ARSL. And that's a really great national organization. It's not the ALA, it's a separate organization. It really focuses on small and rural libraries. And their conference this year is in rural Massachusetts. It's going to be in September. That could be a fun one to go to. Of course, the American Library Association, every library is a political advocacy organization nationally for libraries. If you're doing something like a new capital campaign, a bond vote, they can help out with that, oftentimes pro bono. And then United for Libraries is an organization specific to trustees and friends. You can become a member of United for Libraries, either individually or I think as a board, for a fairly small price and have access to a lot of great resources. So we'd like to mention that. A couple more resources I mentioned earlier, Division of Duties chart. this is a great chart. I think United for Libraries actually is the people, they're the folks who produced that chart. But this has kind of a columns for this is what trustees should do. This is what the director should do. This is what the friends typically do. And so you can link to that. There's also a wonderful annual policy review calendar. I'm going to be expanding upon that in that workshop that I'm giving at VLA. But a lot of boards like to review their policies on a regular basis to see maybe what needs updating, what maybe we could drop that's no longer needed, like a VHS tape policy for rewinding was one libraries had when I first started out, and I feel a little old now. But that's probably one that's been dropped, and then maybe holes in your policies where you need a new one. And Finally, there's some additional resources. I had mentioned checking to see if your library is registered and active with the Secretary of State if you're incorporated. Common Good is a wonderful organization that exists in Vermont to support nonprofits, including libraries. They have some great information and webinars that they offer. And then some more nonprofit corporation related. This is not Title 22. This is Title 11B, but it does apply to incorporated libraries because they're nonprofits. So finally, um, thank you so much for coming. I want to say thanks to all of you for serving as a trustee. It's a challenging and important activity. It's a way to give back to your community, and oftentimes it's a lot more work than you might have thought it was going to be. So thank you for that. There is a link to an evaluation that we would love for you to fill out so we can know what we did well and know what we could do better the next time around. And I want to both give Joy a chance to say thanks and also give you a chance to ask some last minute questions. So
Yeah,
let me
we'll get to
see.
the questions. I just want to quickly second what Kevin said. Thank you so much for doing this work. Obviously, the libraries could not function without boards of trustees. And the longer I do this job, been here 6 years now, and worked at 2 libraries in Vermont. And it seems like the stronger the trustees are, the healthier the library is, and it plays out that way time and again. So thank you so much for doing and for coming to training. So there is a question from Sarah. A couple of questions.
So that's a fun question, Sarah, because you are not required to store policies. Your secretary, hopefully your bylaws have a secretary, and they would be the people in charge of making sure that you have continuity of documents in your library. But you are not required to store them in any particular format. In fact, the state archivist, are they the ones who put out the schedule of records
Yeah,
retention?
Basara.
Um, so there's a schedule of records retention put out by the state archivist that municipal libraries have to follow, and it is what they have said format agnostic, which means your library policies can be stored in print, in the meeting minutes, online, in a shared drive. Our recommendation typically is to store important things in 2 places so you don't lose it if something happens to what's online. And also for policies that are public facing, not your bylaws necessarily, but like your behavior policy, it's good to have some of those available for the public to be able to review. So either in print, somewhere in the library, or on your website. But it's good to be, open about what those policies are. So, very good question. Um, any other questions at all at this point?
There was a question, should every library have a friends group? We
Oh,
didn't get to that,
hmm,
so
hmm,
not
good
necessarily.
question.
Yeah, it's a good question, and there isn't really no, you don't have to have one. It can be very helpful if it works well, and there are some libraries that have very successful friends groups. They can raise a lot of money. They can do a level of advocacy that the trustees and director can't do. They can pay for special things that are not part of the regular operations of the library. I know I actually worked at a library where I was very active in the American Library Association while working at a small library. It was very expensive to be very active and, in a committee that, and they helped me travel to that. There could be small projects like that, and not, niche kind of projects like that. But it's a lot of effort to start one. So, I wouldn't say necessarily that like it's such a benefit that if you don't have one, that would be where you'd want to put your energies. So, what, Kevin, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that that's right on. Yeah, I think it's great, ideally to have, but not every library is going to have the capacity for it or right away. So, I think that's a smart approach. Um, and I just want to follow up on a question Jody had about getting sworn in. I don't think it's required. Different towns have different policies for their town, and so that may be something that's within the way the select board functions. I think that also could depend on whether trustees are appointed by the select board or elected. Both of those things can happen in a municipal library. Likely, if they're elected, they would have been um, uh, they've already been given the stamp of approval by the clerk. But if they're appointed, there may be something that's required, but it's probably in the bylaws of the town. So I wouldn't worry about it if you haven't been had to have an oath. Um, and Lauren, your question about gift policies. Um, there are standard policies related to gifts, and I do think that we have at least one gift policy linked on the website. So that is something that typically, even if you don't have a friends group, it is good to have something in place. And I'll tell you a couple reasons why. One is if you get a very large gift, it's good to define what that's for. I would never, talk bad about a municipality, but if someone leaves you $2 million, you may not want that to replace your operating budget for 10 years. You may want that, they may have intended that to go towards, a capital improvement or something like that. And so having that ahead of time set up is important. And the other reason is if you want to refuse a gift. Um, I worked at a library where I got a call once about someone wanting to donate 500 cookbooks from the 70s to the library. And I said, no, that's not within our gifts policy. And then I showed up on Monday and they were literally barricading the door where I had to enter in boxes. So the policy didn't work out, but at least we had one where I could say, we don't really want this donation, but thank you for thinking of us. So those are the sort of two areas. I don't know, Joy, if there's any other, but I would say yes, that's a policy. It is. I wouldn't say it's in the top five to have, but it is a good policy to have even if you don't have friends.
Yeah, and just a reminder that I'm not sure what kind of library you're from, Lauren, but the library can still people can still make donations to a municipal library that doesn't have a friends group by donating it to the town for the library. So, it doesn't mean that you can't ever take donations if you don't have a friends group. It's just a different process.
Thank you. Very good point. Um, oh, thank you. That's such a nice thing to say, man. I think we're all done for now, but you see, again, there's the evaluation. We're going to send everybody the PowerPoint, and you have our phone and our email contacts there. And thank you, everybody, and thanks, Joy, for putting this together.
Thanks, everybody.